to the top. We got so far to go, even farther back to home. So many times we could have stopped when we got stuck in the mud and we felt like giving up. But this is our road, and y'all are my people. No matter where we go, never alone. No, we're not gonna stop till we get to the peak. Going high, 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 gonna fly through the ether.
Hello, and welcome to Notes from the Healing Field, a safe space for self-healers to explore their own journey. I am Krista Xiomara, your host and guide. The intention of this podcast is to create an open source spiritual classroom for every sentient being who's navigating the human experience. Together, we will examine themes of awakening, healing, and integration. We will use our curiosity as our guide on this path of expansion and compassion as our compass. All the information shared is open source and free to everyone, and is intended to support the collective awakening and liberation of humanity, in harmony with our highest shared desire for peace on earth. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Let's get into it. Welcome to episode 2 of this solo podcast adventure that I'm doing with you all. To all the self-healers out there that are having a wonderful time on their healing journey. I'm here to supplement all of that for you guys today. So episode 2, before we get into it, anyone that's watching on YouTube, I just want to address a couple things. I'm based in Austin, Texas. It's very, very hot here. I'm in a tank top. My hair looks like I could be an extra in The Lion King. So right out the gate, I'm going to apologize to you for just how hot it is and how it's affecting just the general vibe. And then for those of you who are listening in your car or at your desk at work, you can come check the video out later and see. I'm just hoping to God I don't sweat to death in this video to you guys this week. So, like I said in an introduction for Notes from the Healing Field, every single episode is meant and intended to build on itself. And I've road mapped this entire path and these teachings out in a really specific way so that we are essentially taking a hike together, like a spiritual and healing hike together. And I imagine that we're sort of winding both ways. It's not linear, but we are still having forward momentum up to the pinnacle and peak of a mountain at one point. And to experience that peak in your healing journey is incredible. And not everything gets healed at once, and things come back, and we have to revisit them and all of those things. So, episode 2 is intended to address something incredibly important on the self healing journey, which is self awareness. And I wanted to just go ahead and define self awareness for you guys as it is in our literal language, which it means that we're conscious of our own character, our feelings, our motives, and our desires. So, I have a friend named Billy Lee Myers Jr., who's been on my other podcast multiple times, who is a spiritual psychotherapist. And he notes all the time, and I've stolen this from him, is that, everybody is on the path of awakening. And a part of that awakening requires our own self-consciousness along this path as well. So we are all waking up to our own self all the time, and consciousness on the path of healing and personal development and integration and homecoming is integral. We can't really go far along this journey unless we understand ourselves deeply, and that we also have a deep level of self-awareness, which is what we're going to talk about in today's episode. And that self-awareness allows us a 50,000 foot view on ourselves and how we are operating in the system of our humanity, at the level of our soul, with other people, and basically gives us the ability to see ourselves, I would say, in our highest version. Because when we look at ourselves with self-awareness, one of the things we really want to keep in mind is that we are not having a critical eye or a critical mind to ourselves, that we're allowing a lot of deep curiosity and compassion when we're going on the path of developing our self-awareness. So, the reason why I want to talk about self-awareness as well is because if we start to have a deep understanding of like who we are and why we do the things we do and the things that affect us as adults that happened to us when we were a child, or situations in our adulthood that bring us pain or discomfort and we don't really understand where those are going, having a deep level of self-awareness allows us to find the why so that we can get the how to heal. And those two things are incredibly important. Um, so, a couple of areas we're going to unpack today is, becoming investigators of our own lives, unearthing and examining the past to heal it, but then also how we create a future for ourselves, in parallel to to healing, which is really big. Um, I want to talk to you about two books that were um, crucial in my own self-awareness and awakening, and you might have already heard of them. So that's The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and then The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And then having insight about self-awareness in a very self-deluded world. So one thing that I talk about in my religious trauma and healing courses is the delusion is very deep in religious communities because there's an indoctrination that happens. There's sort of this sleepiness that is given to the parties involved. And like full disclosure, I've said on my other podcast multiple times, I did grow up in a fundamentalist Christian cultic style Catholic experience. And there is a lot of delusion in the world. There's a lot of unconsciousness. So you have to also take into account how delusional everyone is around you, meaning how asleep they are. And then also, with a lot of compassion and internal kindness, figure out where there is delusion in you that you can't see yourself clearly and what needs to be healed. So, we want to talk about that. And then I want to talk about how there are very many entry points to self awareness, and cultivating that self awareness um, will feel different for people. It will happen differently, but there's a lot of different ways that that happens for people. And the first place I think we should start, like if we're taking our hiking analogy, we're maybe going to be getting on a different trailhead right now, and that trailhead is cultivating self-awareness, and it starts with being honest with ourselves. And this is key. So a lot of times we do as humans, we love to lie to ourselves. Like I know I still do it too. There are times I catch myself and I'm like, oh, I'm just really not wanting to see what's really going on here. I'd rather have another either romanticized or deluded or, misconception about what's actually happening. So we have to think about how we um, cultivate being honest with ourselves. And again, you want to be creating honesty within yourself in a very gentle and loving and compassionate way. And so, and some of us, I think, suffer a little bit more in terms of delusion because we're gullible or we a lot of times think the best of people. But right now we're just talking about ourselves. Right now we're just talking about, how are we not being honest with ourselves? So one part can be like, if you're on the self-healing journey, is being honest about why you want to go on this journey. What is it that you truly want to unpack here? And that honest inquiry allows us to remove ourselves a degree from ourselves, and it allows us the luxury of observing our patterns and our dysfunctions, and then also identifying what positive traits we have. So that's really important. So I think a good starting point for being honest with yourself is number one, asking why you're going on this path anyway. And number two, it's also about understanding if you have victimized yourself in this process as well, or if there are things that you have been dishonest about yourself for why you need healing. So, like a good example of that would be for somebody who was in addiction, right? When people are in addiction, they have to face and confront the honesty of what their actions did for other people and to themselves. Okay, so that would be like an extreme example. But there's also ways that we sabotage ourselves. I'll speak for myself. I'll give you an example. Um, one big healing point in my life was because I was given up for adoption at like a very small age, and then I lived in foster care for 5 years. Um, the the abandonment fear was so deeply embedded in me as an adult, and I didn't get healing for that until I was in my late 20s. And because of that, I would sabotage relationships, friendships. If there was ever just like an inkling that somebody might walk away, or if they were not, if I was not receiving emotional care in the way that I needed it, um, because they couldn't give it, that would freak me out, and I would be like running for, running for the hills. And so I had to be honest with myself and own that what parts of it of that was me, because I started to have this third party objective observation about like, why am I doing this? Why? Because you end up having the same outcome, and you're like, why am I still doing that, right? So it kind of even starts there, probably earlier than just the self inquiry. And you say, like, I don't want to do that anymore. And that was definitely true for me. I thought, I don't want to keep being so afraid that someone's going to abandon me. That's like, that would be the story that I was telling myself. So then I'll abandon them so that I can sort of get in front of the hurt. So those are just some quick examples for you. I want you to sort of think about your own journey, your own pain, your own heartache, the things that you're carrying around. And I want you to think about specifically your own responsibility in those things, and what can you take ownership of today so that you can shine some additional loving kindness and light on that. And one of the other points here I want to talk about in cultivating self awareness with honesty that's super key is telling ourselves the truth. And I know this sounds silly, but it's true. We need to tell ourselves the truth even when it's painful. So sometimes that's like as little as like, you know, maybe I'm in a partnership that is not serving me as an individual, or maybe I'm in a job that's toxic and is actually contributing to my overall mental health and I'm not doing well. And where we get caught in the opposite side of that, which I want to call attention to in telling our truths, is a lot of us don't want to tell us the truth because we're beholden to shoulds, right? So there's, like in the example I just gave you about the toxic workplace, you could be telling yourself in the inverse, like, I should be fine to continue on this job, or like, I should keep this job because it pays well, or I should keep this job because my parents are really proud of me that I have this job. And so you get caught up in these shoulds. And the reason I want to call attention to those shoulds is because what I want to say here is, like, you've got to detach, like, where in that equation are you hurting yourself by pleasing something external? So you're having that really honest conversation about telling yourself the truth. And we have to be honest with ourselves in order to heal, because when we go on this healing path, it's going to require a high level of honesty so that we can alchemize what happens to us and we can look at things clearly. And later on in the podcast, we will talk about assigning responsibility and taking ownership. So there's all of the healing that we required because of external elements, meaning like other people and other variables. Then there's like, and then there's also what we do. And then there's everything that we have to own in that, right? And it's important that if we are outside of systems that are no longer harming us, we're incredibly empowered to create internal healing. So most of us hopefully are out of those negative situations or harmful situations where we're not being traumatized again. So that's a different podcast. That's a different story if that's happening for you. But for now, let's focus on, if we're not in those situations again, how can we start cultivating that healing? The other big layer, which I already sort of mentioned a little bit, is like the stories we tell ourselves, which is so big. We tell ourselves stories all the time. We're constantly in conversation with ourselves. And if you have a negative dialogue, it's possible you're telling yourself some really terrible things about the things that hurt you. So it's like, I'm so stupid, I got in another bad relationship, or I ate that peanut butter and jelly sandwich when I wasn't hungry, or you know, I'm a loser, or what, fill in the blank for whatever that could be. Um, and but also when we find ourselves in similar situations, like I mentioned before, and we're having that outcome happen again and again, it's we're also telling our stories about that person in that situation. Like, I'm always going to be with somebody who doesn't respect me, or like I can only find, partners that want short-term commitments, or it could be that like you can't have a good relationship with your mother because you're not her favorite. Your dad doesn't love you. Your siblings don't understand you, like whatever that story is. And I really want you guys just to pick one for this week to think about and to simmer on and to unpack with yourself, because we can't chew everything off all at once because we'll choke. But so we're going to do everything in like little bites. But telling ourselves these stories over and over can be really to hard and impede our healing. So if we're telling ourselves these stories, we have to interrupt that storyline as well. So when I talk about like cultivating the self-awareness and the honesty, part of that is being able to identify when you're telling yourself a story. I'm always going to be like this. I'm never going to be rich. I'm never going to have money. I'm never going to find somebody who loves me. I'm always going to be fat. I'm fucked up because this, that, and the other happened to me, and I can never be in a normal relationship. Like, whatever those stories are to yourself, having an honest conversation with yourself and asking, like, is this true? Is this really true? Or is this just something I've convinced myself of over time? Is the outcome that I've determined really the outcome that I think is or not supposed to, excuse me, that will potentially happen? And 9 times out of 10, it's not. So it's about creating that space between your self awareness, the honesty you're having, and then the story that you're telling, and then starting to tell a different story. And we will get to that. The other point I want to talk about here, in layering on how we're going to cultivate self awareness, is deep presence. So I know you probably don't want to hear this because everyone has said it from the beginning of time. But if you don't have a meditation practice, like, please, please, please start one, because having that deep presence starts truly in a deep meditative state. Um, the only other people who find it, and many meditators and teachers and wisdom holders have said, the only other place you really find that are with people like athletes who are doing like, they get in the zone and they drop into this deep presence and awareness. But for most of us regular people who are just living their lives every day, going about work and children and home and parents and all the things, we need to create some space in between the space through a meditation. And like for me, when I started meditating, I started doing just silent meditation. So I wasn't doing a mantra, I wasn't staring at a candle light, I wasn't practicing my breath. Like none of that. I was super basic in the beginning because I just wanted to calm my mind and just make it still as possible. And again, that may not work for everyone, but it worked for me in the beginning, was to just be quiet with myself and not having to focus on the breath or a mantra or an image or any other ideas. And I wholeheartedly believe there's no right way to sort of get into the stillness of yourself. I think you have to trust your own intuitive guidance for how you get that. That can even be a walk in nature, that could be doing your dishes, that could be moving your body. I mean, I want you guys to be incredibly creative and intuitive about how you innovate that stillness in your mind. And the reason why we want to create that stillness is because, again, when we're telling those stories, if we have that mental space, we can see that there's an alternative statement to say to ourselves. But we have to have the objectivity and the stillness to be able to insert something new. Otherwise, you just like go on with your story. So, if this doesn't make sense to you, please reach out to me and we will talk about it in depth. And I will explain it in some different ways or different terms. But we need that space to be able to identify the story, to to be honest with ourselves, to cultivate the awareness. So it's kind of like an inverse of why we're wanting to have that deep presence and why that's so important. The other thing I mentioned a little bit earlier is how we're all, if we're not on this path, we're walking around very unconsciously. Some people call them sleepwalkers. Some people say that you're domesticated. There's a lot of language we could use here, but the reason why I wanted to bring up this unconsciousness is because you'll have to be careful about falling back into unconsciousness once you start to awaken and once you start to create self awareness and cultivate that beautiful internal kind dialogue that supports your healing long term. Is because one thing I want to mention here is that our unconsciousness, it's a reaction to a lot of the pain and the I would say the lack of freedom we have in our lives. I think if you are, stuck in a corporate job, if you're stuck in a small town, I mean, the list is endless here for why you could be going unconscious. But the reason is there's an escapism that's happening there, that like you'd rather in your mind be somewhere else. And we have to be really careful about not projecting ourselves somewhere else when we're trying to go on the path of healing. And a lot of us do this because we want to avoid something. And especially on the healing path, if you have something that needs and requires healing, sometimes it can feel, and I've said this multiple times, like harder to address the thing and then, or it's harder to address the thing to heal it than it is to just leave it alone. And so some people will be like, I'd rather sweep it. It seems like less work to just sweep it under the rug, but actually it's not. It just always comes back and always manifests. And so we want to be careful about falling unconscious again. And a good way of doing that is just by bringing yourself back into the present moment and having a deep sense of presence, and like even just looking around the room and like, where am I, like where did I go in my mind for a second, where am I here in this moment, in this minute, at this time, like even looking at like your clock, where am I in this moment. And then when we leave our body just to live inside our head, we're basically, you know escaping what we need to confront. And I want to reassure you that it is scary to confront your own healing, and it's hard sometimes, and it's a it's an individual path that we must walk mostly on our own so that we can create the type of healing that liberates us and sets us free. Although some of us, if we have the luxury, will do it with therapists, healers, seekers, friends, um, spiritual, pastors or whomever it is. But for the most part, you're doing this work on your own. And that can be scary. And we want to leave our body when those memories come up, because a lot of our memories that are traumatic and that require healing are literally stuck in our body. And that can be really scary. And I want to reassure you that you're going to be okay and that you can do it, and that you just need the right tools and resources to help you move that trauma through to its completion so that you can live liberated and free and whole and happy and just aligned as much as you can. Um, I think the other thing I want to mention is that's really critical, and when we talk about the stories we tell ourselves is judgment. So I grew up in a system, a family system, and a religious system that used judgment as collateral and currency. So I learned from a very early age that, to judge everyone else and everyone else was wrong and like everyone else was going to hell and, like all of the awful things you should never teach a child. And I had to unlearn all of those things. I had to unlearn that. There was also in my religious community, which I'll lean on a lot for this. So thank you for listening to all of this. If you've heard it on my other podcast, but there was also this like technique of people constantly what they would call in our community calling you out. So like if your skirt wasn't long enough or if your lipstick was too red, you might bring somebody to lust. So there was this like that it created this internal superiority that you were basically policing everyone, which we see now in our current society that is specifically from the right wing government leaning people, is there is this constant policing of other people's autonomy, and it's born of that idea in Christianity that you're your brother's keeper and you should call them out, and it's not right. So, anyways, the reason I wanted to say about the judging is that it's important for us to not judge ourselves through this healing. And in order to cultivate that deep sense of self awareness, we really want to let go and drop all the judgment we feel. Because when we're telling those stories, those negative stories about like however unhealed we are, or if we're talking specifically about the wound that is not healing and how it's causing us pain, we're adding a lot of judgment around there. Like, I should be over this now. This shouldn't hurt so much. I can't believe this is coming up again. I'll never be able to let go of this. And it's important for us to recognize through deep presence, through honesty, through objectivity, and through self awareness, like all of these things are working in parallel for us to see, oh, I'm being incredibly unkind to myself here. And we don't want to do that. I don't want to do that to myself. You don't want to do that to yourself. It's important that we recognize when that's happening, and that judgment, um, number one, I want to reiterate, it's a very standard protocol in the human process. And even if you didn't grow up in a religious community or system, there's so much about our world through competitiveness, through the patriarchy, through the systemic sort of boxing of our femininity, that has required people to be judges of other people, and they're not. There's no requirement. I mean, that's the thing. So I'm not going to get on a soapbox there, but I did want to call that out specifically because you might feel that coming up as you're working with your own judgment, or your I'm sorry, as you're working through your own healing, you might feel that judgment come through, and that's normal and that's okay. And it's good to let go of that if you can, the sooner the later. The one thing I wanted to talk about, the power of now, before this is we're kind of winding down to the end of the episode, and I'll leave some guide work for you guys at the end of the episode. And then again, if you want to work with me one-on-one, you can always visit www.iamkristaxiomara.com. You can go to my offerings page and sync up to work with me. I'd be happy to work with you guys. But as we wind down, I did want to come back to the power of now and the four agreements. The power of now is such a critical book. Is it right here? Oh no, this is a New Earth. Um, so the power of now is Eckhart Tolle's book, and I tell you, it's one of those books I think that even if you aren't in a place where you feel ready to start awakening, the language in that book is helps you pull yourself outside of yourself, which is so critical in doing the self-healing work, because you've got to be able to pull yourself out a degree to address everything from the past with a loving, deep kindness and compassion and patience. And you have to be able to remove yourself a degree from everything that happened and all the stories we tell ourselves, and the power of now that allows us to recognize how nothing exists in our lives except for this moment. This moment I'm spending with you now is the only place we're ever going to meet, in this moment, in this conversation with this thing now. And in that deep presence, there's power in that. And that power is all the things I just listed off, that allows you to come back into the fullness of your own human experience and recognize that you have a lot of power inside yourself. So I would highly recommend, if you have not read that book, get it now. Read it a couple times. I know Oprah, I feel like she reads A New Earth and The Power of Now, I think every year, she said. They're so good. I know I've read them multiple times and I have them on audiobook, and I go back to them often to just wake myself up again and make sure I'm not falling asleep again or sleepwalking or any of the things. And then the Four Agreements, which is by Don Miguel Ruiz, wonderful author, and then both of his sons are authors as well. And he has a beautiful daughter named Carla who works with the family as well. They're an amazing, amazing Toltec family. If you have not heard of them, I would ask you to just, pause and go get the Four Agreements off Amazon, or oh, sorry, this is not an Amazon plug, but go get, probably at an indie bookstore. So go pick up that book or listen to it on Audible, because the Four Agreements are a system of statements that allow us to, in every single moment with ourselves and others, be present, be really precise with our language, to not judge ourselves, and to also put our ego, I think, in its place. And we'll talk about the ego along this journey as well. And it's a short, small book, but it's so powerful as well. And it gives you the tools and the systems to be able to be kinder with yourself, and to also give other people a break, which is important on this journey too, which we'll talk about, giving other people the space they need, and deciphering for yourself when you put boundaries up as you heal. So that's our class for today. I super appreciate you guys spending this time with me. If there's anything you want to talk about specifically, I'm happy to do some bonus side episodes for you. I will be doing a bonus relationship and healing episode with the dating expert Laura Forbes of Quit Dating Idiots. I can't wait to share that with you. I've also revamped the cover art and the intro song, which is a beautiful song called Soar. So we break up the song in the beginning and at the end, but if you listen to it all together, it's everything that we're doing here. And I can't believe I found this original music for this podcast, and it's everything. I've danced around my house to this music, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And I hope it pumps you up before we start getting into this deep work every time one of these episodes airs. And I will see you guys again.
This podcast was written, directed, and produced by me, your host, Krista Xiomara, in alignment with light casting. Original song Soar, composed and produced by Sing Hits, with lead vocals by X. Rack up some good karma by sharing this podcast with another self-healer. You can find notes from the healing field on all social media channels and YouTube. Head over to your favorite podcast app and subscribe, rate, and review.
All the small wins give us hope. Little signs to let us know that we're not so far away. Yeah, yeah. We're gonna make it to the goal. Cups dry, but our hearts are full. So